I'd say the world perverts sex, religion shames it, but God celebrates it. How many know there was sex before there was sin? Here we go. That's the truth. It's interesting how we attach shame to things that the Bible doesn't attach shame to. For instance, how many of you know that we were circumcised of heart? And how many of you know when you were in the Old Testament, you had to be circumcised to actually be a part of the kingdom, if you were a man? Circumcision means cutting off the foreskin of a man's penis. That's repeated throughout the Bible. It's like, what I'm getting at is this. Isn't it interesting how men found God in the Old Testament? Do you know that before they crossed into the Promised Land, they crossed the Jordan River, and before they could come into Canaan, into the Promised Land, they had to pass through a city called Gilgal. And they had a men's meeting. How many of you remember that? And they had to be circumcised before they can come into the Promised Land. What I'm getting at is this. Isn't it funny that God is not ashamed to talk about a man's penis in the Bible? As a matter of fact, he says, hey, we need to do something about this before you come. And we're going to have a men's meeting. And it's going to be revealing. And when the men came home from the men's meeting, the women are like, what'd you guys talk about? And let me just say that he didn't need to tell her what they talked about, because the way he was walking had a lot to do with what they were talking about. And the Bible talks about sex from Genesis to Revelation. So God is not ashamed of sex. He actually created it. How many of you know when God said, be fruitful and multiply, he's the one who gave you a sex drive? How many of you know that? Where did the rest of you get yours? And the question is, what does it mean to have a sex drive? That's a good question. I've been asking this all over the world in about 40 countries. We do these moral revolution conferences. They're typically filled with young people, and then we do a parent night. And I ask them, what does it mean to have a sex drive? Because I ask everybody, how many of you know God gave you a sex drive? Almost everybody raises their hand, except for the people who won't raise their hand for anything. And I say, what does it mean to have a sex drive? And everybody's, I don't know. It means you want to have sex with somebody. That's what a sex drive means. It means you want to have sex with somebody. And the goal is not to get rid of your sex drive. The goal is to learn how to manage your appetite. This is too bad this is a revelation. People are sitting quiet. Write that down, honey. The goal is not to get rid of your sex drive. Like, God is not ashamed of your sex drive. I'd like to suggest to you that the world's in a mess, and a lot of it has to do with sexuality. It's funny that we'll talk about divorce, but as Paul Manwaring said to me tonight, we hardly ever talk about marriage. The number one reason why people get divorced is sexually incompatibility. And we don't talk about it in church. And guess who's teaching society about sex? The people who pervert it. And then we used to send little Johnny to school to learn about sex because we were ashamed to tell him at home. That's why the school system had to start telling Johnny about it. And then guess what they're teaching Johnny in school? You guessed it. In California, you have to teach kids. You have to teach kids by requirement. You have to teach kids you can be bisexual, homosexual, heterosexual. You have to teach them about all the different avenues of sexuality. That's who's teaching your kids. But you know why they got the job? Because you're not doing it at home. Send Johnny off to learn about sexuality in school, because that's the right place to teach them. And if you say anything about sex in church, people are like, this is church. Shouldn't we be talking about God in church? We are. He said, be fruitful and multiply. It was the first commandment given to man and woman. So how many know God gave you a sex drive? He's not ashamed of it. He actually celebrates it. Aren't you glad that, like, you didn't, like, you know, how many know it was God's idea to make it fun? This is the way we teach sex to our kids. You're not going to like it. It's painful. You could go blind. You could get a disease. That's the way we tell it. God doesn't tell a sex story like that. Aren't you glad, like, God didn't make you, like, lay on it, you know, sit on an egg for 9 months like birds? I mean, how many people would be here if we were like birds, you know? All right, your turn. No, I sat on them yesterday. Trust me, you wouldn't need birth control. So the world shames sex. Perverts sex, and religion shames sex. Religion's like, oh, be careful how you say that. Be careful. Let's whisper it in the corners of our homes. A wide brushstroke is that people are delaying marriage into the late 20s and 30s, even into their 40s. I mean, intentionally delaying is my point. And my question would be this: if the only way you could have sex was marriage, like if there was nothing else, there was no porn, there was no cohabiting, there was no one-night stands, there was no date stuff, there was none of that, there was no masturbation, there was nothing except for if you wanted to have sex, your only outlet was get married. I bet people wouldn't delay marriage so much. And see, let me tell you something. That's God's plan. So as soon as you take away all other options, if you take away all other options for sex, now you have God's plan. Because Paul said, it's better to marry than to burn with passion. His first statement was, I'd rather that you be like me, single. But each man has his own gift from God. The word gift there is the word charisma. It's the same where we get our word for spiritual gifts. In other words, it takes a gift from God to be single for life. Why? Because when God created Adam was looking for a helper. You remember this? God looked for helpers among the animals. Didn't find any. Dog lovers? He didn't find any. So what did he do? He put Adam to sleep. You remember this? And what did he do after that? He took the woman out of the man. Where was the woman? In the man. No, you're giving me that, I doubt it. False prophet thing. I ain't going there today. So the Lord caused a deep sleep to fall upon man, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed it up in that place. The Lord fashioned into a woman the rib which he'd taken from the man and brought her to the man. And the man said, now this is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of the man. What is marriage? It's when the woman who was taken out of the man and the man who no longer has the woman in him merges. Marriage comes from the word merge. It means for the one that became two, now the two became one. That's the reason why two males can't marry. It doesn't create wholeness. I'm saying, do whatever, listen, whatever you want to do. I'm saying, the Bible says that the one became two. When Adam woke up, he said, whoa, man. Stupid joke. I'm not the first. He was both man and woman. How do I know that? Because the woman was taken out of the man. And he wakes up and half of him's missing. It's the truth. Half of him is missing. He wakes up. He had to have felt that the female side of God is missing. How many of you know God is not a man? He's both male and female. He created Adam, both male and female. It takes a male and a female to represent God. If you oppress women, you miss half the nature of God. Are you with me? The man wakes up, and the feminine side of man is missing. Now, none of us would know what that feels like because you're either feminine or you're masculine. So you're not both. But Adam, in the beginning, was. So I don't know what it would be like, but it had to be pretty dramatic when he wakes up and half of him is missing. And he looks up and he sees half of him in bodily form in front of him. And what's he do? He instantly wants that back. He wants it back. And now he needs the woman the way he needs God, because he's not complete without the woman in the way he's not complete without God. When God said, I'll make Adam a helper, the word helper there, how many know the Holy Spirit's your helper? The word helper is used 3 times for a woman and 13 times for God in the Old Testament alone. She was the helper the way God's a helper, not a slave. And what I'm getting at is that the sexual union bonds them the way God, when God put them to sleep, divided them. This is what marriage is. It is the reunion of the original way you were created. This is beautiful. Did you understand? Like sex isn't, not only is it not shameful, it's actually beautiful. It's actually beautiful. And the fact that great pleasure comes from sex is actually a prophetic metaphor of how God feels about sex. Romans 1, God's invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature are clearly seen in what God made, which includes sex. The fact that you love doing it, the fact that you love the act of sex is how much God loves giving the gift to you. God gave the gift to you. It wasn't the devil. The devil's perverting it. He's stealing it. And he's using the most beautiful gift God gave to people who will spend their life together. He's perverting that gift and making it the worst thing on the planet. And God made it the best thing. God said, you're going to like this. Do you know how big sex is in the Bible? Do you know that weddings lasted a week? Jewish weddings lasted a week in the Bible. Do you know that? Remember Jesus made wine and the wine ran out? It wasn't because of how much they drank in a day. Weddings lasted a week. And you know how a wedding took place in the Bible? Very typical to an American wedding. There would be a bride and a groom, and there would be the families of the bride and the families of the groom. And while they were exchanging vows, the men from both families would bring their weapons and lay them up in front at the wedding while the vows were taking place. And so the man would make vows, a covenant, lifetime covenant. The woman would do the same. And then there would be no dancing, there would be no drinking, there would be no celebration, and the bride and the bridegroom would go in to the bridal chamber, which typically was a tent pitched in the middle of the wedding grounds. It's a true statement. They would go into the tent and they would consummate the marriage. Then they would take the bloody sheet. You understand why there was a bloody sheet? Okay. So we'd take the bloody sheet. I'm trying to make this G, as much G as possible. Listen, I do graphic when we do kids, because they get graphic the other direction. So they take the bloody sheet and they throw it over the bridal chamber wall. Well, everybody's outside. Now, maybe I didn't get this to you. The tent's in the middle of the celebration, and the people are waiting for them to consummate the marriage. After they consummate the marriage, they take the sheet that should have blood on it, right? Because how many know God gave a woman a hymen? Why did he do that? Only purpose for a hymen. Only one reason. It doesn't heal after it breaks the first time, right? Because God wanted children to be born out of covenant. So he provided the blood. So the covenant was made before the children were conceived. It's a blood covenant. God designed in humanity the ability to make a blood covenant. There's no other reason for a hymen. So who you are intimate with, into me you see, you make a covenant with. Only once. Because that's how God designed it. Everybody else is waiting outside. Now, let me be clear. This was not an over 18 or over 21 event. Little Johnny, who's 3, is at this event. Little Mary is at this event. This is a family affair. They're in the tent consummating the marriage. Well, little Johnny and Mary are playing. All of a sudden, there's some noise in the tent, and then there's a sheet. Now, you can imagine little Johnny, he's 3. What does he know? He goes, well, I already got in a fight. I've been in there half an hour, and they already got in a fight. And now the celebration starts. So no celebration before the consummation of marriage. Are you with me? And now the celebration starts. The dancing, the drinking, the singing. That goes on for a week. Now, how many of you know there's Jewish culture doesn't have a talk? You know the talk? Some of you are like, we don't have a talk at our house either. We have the figure it out for yourself, kid. You know the talk? Why are you guys looking at me like that? You don't ever look at me like that when I preach. You're nervous. You know the talk? Jewish culture don't have a talk. They have a healthy sexual culture. They don't have to have a talk because little Johnny is exposed to sexuality since he can remember. And that tent becomes a conversation piece. The older he gets, the more revelation his parents give him about what's going on in the tent. But one of the things he realizes is there's no celebration until the bloody sheet. What's he thinking? Why? Why didn't they celebrate when they exchanged vows? Something's going on in that tent. Listen, they were celebrating something going on in that tent. Are you with me? And what they're celebrating is the fact that those two people kept themselves. Theoretically, kept themselves. I'm saying, yeah, you can break all the rules, but I'm saying God set it up so that best case scenario is God's voice. Are you with me? And little Johnny realizes that there's something about this thing that these people celebrated, that these people did, and there's something about the blood, and he's got questions. Of course he has questions. And you can imagine that he enters his teen years, and his sex drive comes alive, that he has more questions about what's going on in there. And it's not a shock because he's been going to weddings since he was in his mama's arms. It wasn't an over 18 event. And why did the men bring their weapons, you ask? Because the covenant was never between two people. It was between two families. And the men brought the weapons as a prophetic declaration that we will protect this covenant that we made together. That's why a king would marry the daughter of another king and their countries would suddenly be in covenant. Because covenant was never between two people, it was between two families.